Hi everyone, and welcome to a Go Parody interview with Plantae Environmental, a Canadian company helping restore landscapes affected by construction, infrastructure development, mining, and other industrial activities. Through innovative plant-based restoration materials, Plantae is working to reduce erosion, support vegetation growth, and help damaged ecosystems recover naturally. Today we are joined by Trevor Kloeck, co-founder and president of Plantae Environmental.
My name is Trevor Kloeck, co-founder and president of Plantae Technologies and Plantae Environmental. And I come from a farming background. So I actually grew up in Alberta in the agricultural industry. My dad was very heavily involved in innovation and crop research from when I was a kid. So I started doing crop research with my dad, just shoveling
Oh,
stuff when I was like probably 8, 10 years old. And from that, I ended up going into the University of Alberta. I got my biology degree. I'm a biologist by profession. Then spent the first half of my career in agriculture. What's interesting about that first half is it was split into two roles, which actually kind of formed the genesis of how Plantae was created. The first half was actually as an agronomist, where I did crop research and worked in extension and worked with farmers to adopt new practices, especially around the environment. And then the second thing was all around business development, where I was tasked with saying, finding new markets for agricultural materials. And that's essentially how I got into this, is when we started to discover there was this whole unknown world in the industrial materials space that agriculture could actually supply. And we saw the environment, especially with Alberta being such a major player in the resource industry, being one of the best places to start.
Perfect. Thanks for that background. And it's really amazing to hear how a Plantae for you started when you were so young, like back to when you were 10 years old. Um, my next question here, and you kind of already touched on it, is more so around what problem did Plantae originally set out to solve? Like, what is the problem you hope to address?
So what's interesting about Alberta in general, and this is true for Canada as well, is we're obviously and going to become more so over the next little while the natural resource superpower. What we're bad at is communicating how good we are environmentally. And I experienced that the first time in agriculture, where we were doing a whole bunch of what were in the end world-class leading practices in the field, and then doing an excellent job of telling nobody. So the problem that we kind of saw is, okay, we're really good at this in agriculture. Can we extend this into the industrial world for oil and gas, pipelines, mining, et cetera? And the answer was emphatically yes, because the science behind the soils, how we control erosion, how we actually manage and work with the environment, those rules are exactly the same. And so what we saw here was a very sophisticated local market in Canada that was almost the perfect incubator for this innovation cycle, right? So, when we have all this negative press around what we do in the energy and in the environmental sector here, what it's done to Canadian innovators, whether you're somebody like Suncor or beyond, is it's forced you to be good. What we're not good at is communicating. So we use that that innovation, silent innovation that we have in agriculture, forestry, and the energy sector to essentially form the catalyst for our product line. So what we do is we use the basis in agriculture for our products to formulate kind of the same kind of science into industrial applications. And it all comes down to the principle of actually fixing damaged soils, right? Where it gets even more exciting from our standpoint is that it allows us to actually also fix problems that we see in the oil and gas industry around kind of greening up their image and actually increasing their environmental performance and doing that in a very cost-effective way. So the technology that we use allows us to actually do both, right? So we make an environmental mulch that we use to stabilize these sites, and we're able to refine and process really small particles and control the geometry for things like lost circulation materials and other oil and gas additives. So there's a myriad of kind of, we'll call them regional problems that we have, right, that have
Right.
global implications. And so one of the challenges and opportunities that we have now is taking this Canadian business model and extending it to the entire world.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious. You talked a little bit about soil restoration and erosion control. And for those who don't have maybe
Yeah.
the same background as you, can you explain a little bit more as to why it's such an important issue?
Yeah, sure. So anytime we disturb soil, we change the biology and the structure of it, right? So farmers do that when they cultivate their land. That's why they've moved to zero till and conservation tillage practices. Pipelines, mines, even road construction, residential development do the same thing. So we take all that soil, we move it off, we kind of break that structure up, kill a lot of the biology in it, and then put it back. The problem is that we put it back, it's not particularly very stable anymore. So it's much more prone to erosion, and it's much more difficult to get vegetation to grow in it. When those things aren't dealt with, there's compounding and cascading problems that can happen in the environment, right? So, like a really good example of where the opportunity lies for this innovation is if you take just an overseas operation that I've worked on in the past in Latin America, where we have a well-ran mining operation, but they now have these tailings that have things like heavy metals, salts, they may be a little bit acidic in them, and they're not very conducive to growing vegetation. So if they're not stable, everything that's in that soil is now prone to eroding. So it ends up in the water table, it ends up going into a community, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a compounding effect on that mine just in terms of that what looks like a very basic thing around soil stabilization solves an issue that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the actual company. Another
Right.
really good example, just to kind of put this in local perspective, is the city of Calgary is a real innovative region. They're kind of frustrating, I'm sure, for a lot of people that live there. But one of the reasons they've got a really aggressive environmental program around soil is because if developers and construction companies aren't controlling the soil that's on their site, it ends up in their water treatment plant, right? So essentially, the cheapest way for the city to actually reduce their costs and therefore reduce tax burden is to prevent a lot of that stuff from getting into their whole sewage system, right? So that's where we come in. We're able to lower the costs for a lot of this urban and rural development just by keeping like simple things like sediment from washing into a storm drain during a storm. And these are global problems, right? They're everywhere. And so we see the market as being truly something that transcends every market.
My next question is more so focused on Plantae's products. Like, could you walk us through one of your main products and dig into a little bit of how it works? If you could translate that into simple terms, kind of so people can
Sure.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we do with that, we're really unique in the sense that we use a first of its kind refining technology that basically shatters plants. It breaks plants in a very novel way, and it does that with a fraction of the energy. And it's allowed us to take crops like wood fibers and cereal fibers and hemp and break them apart so they actually kind of form a lattice, right? So that's actually the first product we launched as a with this technology, this kind of like fiber lattice type product that we were able to spray with a hose that we installed on the Trans Mountain and the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So when we saw all that environmental scrutiny going on there, basically what it acts like is, for all intents and purposes, like a bit of a web on the soil surface that protects the soil, absorbs the rain energy, and allows the vegetation to grow, right? So it's kind of mimicking nature for all intents and purposes. I often tell people that in layman's terms, we're doctors. We're like taking a skin graft. So we take fibers from a healthy system, like a well-managed farm. We modify those fibers and then we install them on soil that needs a little bit of help to protect it so that it can become healthy again, right? So, and what we do with some of these formulations is we include what we call biotics, which are things like bacteria and fungi and other extractives that actually help that vegetation get going again. And what's exciting about that, and really, really kind of urgent now, is we're dealing with a fertilizer shortage globally based on what's happening in the world right now. So by using these products in these damaged soils, it allows us to actually have an impact in other ecosystems as well in terms of managing fertility requirements overall. So it becomes a multifaceted thing. By just focusing on industrial soils that are compromised, we have a really, really broad market swath to go after. So our role with we'll call it the traditional investors in the resource sector, whether it's oil and gas, mines, pipeline, is we're there to basically improve their environmental performance overall and to reduce their overall risk. So what happens with all these projects is, and they know this, they live this every day, is you disturb the land, you're expected to put it back together, right? And we are generally speaking pretty good at that in North America and in Canada specifically. But it's an area of increasing scrutiny, and we need it for several reasons. We need it for social license, things like getting permits for a pipeline or whatever we may have, or a mine. Then we need it to actually make sure that we're managing our liabilities on those sites, so we're not dealing with, runoff issues and other things here. And so Plantae and the products that it makes are an opportunity to turn um, what's been essentially a cost into a benefit, because what we've learned and what we've developed at Plantae with the oil and gas industry as a customer for has relevance across the entire world, right? So they haven't just incubated, we'll call it a local demand, to fix like a lease site or something like that. They've created a platform for broader sustainability around the world. And like I said, the demands are huge. They're going to get bigger, especially when you consider what's going on in the world. So um, the market's much bigger than the energy sector. Because the energy sector and oil and gas has been local and very sophisticated, it's been kind of the perfect incubator for what we're doing. So that in 5 years, we expect to be in wildfire mitigation to restore damaged areas from that. We'll have a fit in restoring parks and wildlands. We'll have a fit in major urban areas and industrial areas. We may have a fit in agriculture. And it all stems from the fact that, oil and gas has been under the microscope here in Canada for 20 years, and they're actually good at stuff. So now we're going to leverage that experience, which is where we actually focus our products so we get good, grow it into the entire market. And this is big.
Right.
This is a very big business, right? So we're just at the very beginning of it.
I'm just curious, like, if you could walk us through kind of one of your case studies or projects and what kind of impact it had on the land or local community.
Sure. So we did a really interesting project very early out of the gate in BC, actually on a mine tailing site. And so in this case, there was two issues. One is this was in a very remote, very pristine environment. So this has got some of the highest grizzly bear density in the world. So when you went out of your camp in the morning, you looked both ways for bears. You weren't worried about cars, you were worried about bears. And so two things were really relevant there. One, the remoteness made it difficult to reclaim. And the second thing is that the desire and the need to actually restore that environment based on the population of bears and salmon there was actually really high. So what we did in that site is we actually customized a blend based on hemp fibers, biology, and biotics to go onto essentially what was a waste rock pile to create little zones where we were able to get a forest going again. And so the intention there wasn't just to kind of fix that site. The intention was to actually make that site an asset. So obviously trees are going to take some time to grow, but we actually worked with the consultants and the mine owner itself to come up with a plan so that in 50 years, when somebody flies over that site, they're going to see a forest. So what was a liability is now effectively an asset for the company moving forward, right? So, and we see that all over the place where we actually see some of these damaged ecosystems as latent new ecosystems where we can enhance biodiversity. And I've done that several times now where we've actually worked on areas where we've been working in areas where there's endangered species. So you have a major industrial company that's got pressure on them. And so what we like to say is like, turn this into a virtue. You're going to actually be part of the solution. We're going to create some habitat. You're not going to just reduce your liability. We're going to create some habitat, and it's going to cost you nothing because it's just about doing good practice anyways.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. Just two final questions here. My first one is, what excites you and the Plantae team in general most about the future of the company and what's next over the coming year?
Oh, good question. So I think what excites me is that for all intents and purposes, when we think about the kind of environmental products that we produce, we're at the very, very beginning of this cycle. We're not at the end of it. Like mine closure, for example, is still relatively rudimentary worldwide. And so there's a huge baked in market for us to grow into. So that's very, very exciting. There's also some we'll call it moral imperative for us to work hard too, because we're starting to get some really interesting traction in the Arctic as well, as they're worried about permafrost on, right? And so we had a really good conversation with an engineering firm up there just a few weeks ago about the market, and they have some very unique challenges. And the both exciting and comical conversation is like, what kind of products can I buy for this? And I said, well, we're going to build them for you because this is a new problem for everybody, right? Permafrost thawing is a new global phenomenon, right? And it's one that's really important as we open up the Arctic to mining and other energy extraction tools. So I'm excited about kind of the innovation potential we have as a company. We think we have solutions up there. We think they're at our fingertips. We might even be able to get some stuff on the ground here this year. So we're really, really we'll call it the verge of new markets that are just starting to percolate out. And that includes even residential stuff. Like we're getting some really good traction with, we'll call it the retail market, kind of the residential and horticultural market. So this year we're going to be launching a product that helps people grow their lawns without having to put sod down. So it allows them to do it at half the cost with less of an environmental footprint. And so things like that are pretty significant. And those are just things that are kind of coming at us. We're being met by unsolicited potential opportunities and wins almost daily, just because we know this market's coming out fast.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. So many different markets, and it sounds like you're well set up to innovate to meet the needs of those markets. My last question is just if you had any final message you wanted to share with potential investors in the Plantae project.
Yeah, so I think for us, what we've been really focused on with investors is finding people that understand the space, right? So we know we're doing something in a market that's very large in scope. It's going to grow rapidly in the coming years and decades, and it's a huge business opportunity. It's also an opportunity that most people take for granted, right? So when we drive down the road, we don't think that these issues are a big deal. Or if we're in a city and we're complaining about our water bill, we don't really realize that some of these soil practices are what causes it. So for the kind of investors that we're looking at are the ones that get it, right? The ones that see that there's something bigger happening in the world, that we're at the beginning of a major market, and they have the sophistication to understand how and why it fits. And that's I think why this conversation is relevant to us, because a traditional investor, like in an urban area, doesn't really understand this is even a thing. But if you're in the oil and gas industry or in the pipeline industry or you're in the forestry industry, even agriculture, you live it, right? And so those are our ideal investors, is the ones that see that, what we consider an environmental liability is also a massive business opportunity that extends way, way beyond our call it our small energy world here in the West. So